Hello and welcome to the Weekly Sceptic, episode 73. I'm Nick Dixon here with the thinking man's alcoholic Toby Young, and coming up, is army conscription coming back? Loza loses his libel case, and is Kemi an evil plotter? Plus loads more, and of course, peak woke. But Toby, perhaps we should first start by thanking our new subscribers to basedmedia.org is the website name. Based is the name of the whole thing. Some people thought it was base media, some of the boomers out there, but it's based with a D, BASED media.org.
Yeah. Thank you very much, those of you who've subscribed. You will be getting some additional content at the end of this podcast, which other people won't be able to hear. But if you want that additional content, then go over to basedmedia.org. That's based with a D, as Nick said, basedmedia.org, and you can become a premium subscriber for as little as £5 a month, and you get other benefits like an ad-free podcast. And in the other tiers, you can Zoom with me and Nick for just £10 a month. You get a monthly Zoom call with Nick and me. £5 a month enables you to comment beneath our videos. We put some additional premium content now for premium subscribers. You can watch a video of our sold out live show at the Emmanuel Center last year. If you become a premium subscriber, it's cheap as chips. So thanks to those of you who have. And if you haven't, what are you waiting for?
Yeah, absolutely. And we're now doing video. I just tried to change my video settings, but it's just that I'm so exhausted that I just look like that, it turns out. But we're doing videos on the YouTube channel, Weekly Sceptic. Loads of stuff going on. And I just want to quickly address someone, and we do the reviews in the paid section now, but I just do want to quickly address one thing, which is someone wrote, "The Grift is on," because we had a higher tier subscription, which, by the way, Trigonometry have the same one. If you want to go and abuse them, you're always welcome to do that. But the idea that we're grifting, right, because there's a higher tier. So there's a £5 tier for anyone to join. There's a £10 tier. Then we put some, ridiculously high paid tier, just in case any rich donor wants to back us instead of, giving it to HMRC or something, which is a totally normal thing to do. And someone has said here, looking at the subscription for Totally Basic out, and it's $200 a month. Must be a misprint. Who you're trying to attract? Rishi Sunak? Yeah, that'd be a good idea. He could definitely subscribe. I mean... And it says one of the benefits of not being a subscriber is not having to listen to Nick telling you to F off if you post even a mildly critical review of the podcast. Well, I will be telling you to F off for that review, and saying that you're literally worse than Hitler. Because this idea, Toby, of the higher tier, it's annoyed. I've had two things like this now that are annoying people. So firstly, I've done this podcast for over a year with putting in ridiculous amounts of time and effort. Why? Am I making any money? No, we're just basically breaking even and paying back costs. We do the live shows. I mean, why the fuck am I doing it? I'm doing it for free for these people. They admit it's a great podcast. They're annoyed that there's a higher tier. I was walking past Louis Vuitton the other day. I was in West Central London. I don't bash on the window of Louis Vuitton and say, "Oh, your stuff's too expensive." It's just Louis Vuitton. Maybe it's not for me, but it's actually more ridiculous than that, because the equivalent of this is you can go in Louis Vuitton and get the £5 and £10 option. So you can get the Louis Vuitton shoe, you can get the other shoe, you just maybe can't get the bag. But why are you annoyed about the existence of the bag? It's just not for you. That's for rich people that just want to feel like they're supporting us. Toby, what's going on? Why is that a grift?
I think it's a common theme, I think, of trolls on Twitter and other social media platforms, that if you ask to be paid as a content creator, you immediately get accused of being a grifter. It is as though, the conventional thing is just to give it all away for free in perpetuity until eventually you starve to death. And any departure from that model is thought to be a grift. I mean, it's kind of perplexing, but, any excuse by the haters to hate, I guess.
This is like we've opened a supermarket, given them free food for a year. Then the day we charge £5 for an item, £10 for another. Oh, one of them's more expensive. You use outrage. You can't buy the caviar. Yeah, but you can still buy the pasta and the fucking pizza. I'm just like outraged because I'm putting so much into this podcast and getting so little out except insults and obviously some love from our supporters. But it's just like, I just don't understand. I mean, do you want to go back to data entry? I used to do data entry for the tax office. I can do, and then there won't be a podcast, will there? Why are we not allowed to live? I'm trying to just... I can't even afford to furnish my flat at the moment. What do you want from me?
Yeah, it's like maybe because they're used to watching you for free on GB News, and they resent being asked to give any money at all to pay to see you, even though a good 80% of this podcast is still completely free.
But 90, yeah. Go on. But
It's worth
that's a
pointing
good
out.
analogy
It's a good analogy
because
because GB News is able to do that because they've got some rich benefactors.
exactly.
It's not actually free to put out that content. They've just got some rich guys to pay for it. And if I'm perfectly willing to explore that alternative, if a billionaire out there wants to buy the Weekly Sceptic of Base Media Limited and pay me and Nick salaries, then I guess that would be an alternative. But until that happens, I think we can charge a modest amount for premium subscribers.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, exactly. If someone wants to buy it and pays a salary, but GB gets there because it's got rich benefactors and it's hemorrhaging money. That's how it does that. We can't do that because we can't afford to hemorrhage money and we don't have rich benefactors. So that is it. So those people, they just absolutely baffle me. I just don't think they've switched their brains on, and they just, I don't know who they think we are. This is disgusting.
Anyway,
Anyway,
on the subject of grifts, we ought
hmm,
to promote our live show too, just before we get into the meat of the show. So we are doing another live recording of the Weekly Sceptic downstairs at the Hippodrome on February 12th. Tickets are only £25. So if you want to have a drink with Nick and me afterwards at the exclusive upstairs rooftop bar, you can do that for 75 quid. Tickets are selling pretty well. So if you are interested in coming to that, you can go to basemedia.org, whether you're a paid subscriber or not, and click on events, and you can buy tickets for the show that way.
yeah, and I'll work incredibly hard preparing for the show, incredibly hard for the 2 hours of the show, being hilarious, using my 11 years of live stand-up experience, and get absolutely nothing for it, and then be accused of grifting. So make sure you come on Feb 12th. All right, so let's get into it then with the first story, which is this army conscription story. So the chief of the general staff, General Sir Patrick Sanders, says citizens should be trained and equipped to launch themselves into a kind of citizen army to take on Russia. This was a sort of posh guy mouthing off. These old army posh people want us all to go and die. Then General Sir Richard Sheriff, ex-deputy supreme allied commander of NATO, said basically the same thing. He said we have to think the unthinkable. And Tim Stanley wrote an excellent article sort of saying, why would we bother signing up for the neoliberal globalist project that we have no affiliation with? And Carl Benjamin's had some exchanges along those lines on X. And what's fascinating is he's basically saying, why should we sign up as patriots who have just been despised? The country just falling apart, it's mass immigration, cost of living, blah, blah, blah. We're kind of hated. Why would we sign up for this country? Meanwhile, the leftists say to him, well, we're not going to sign up, especially the ones that are recent immigrants. They say, well, we've been called invaders and foreign by the far right, and we're not going to sign up. We don't identify with this country. And they explicitly hate the country anyway. It's decolonization, it's anti-imperialism, and so on. So who is left? Well, really, you're just left with the Remainer in the middle, who's in line with this ideology, the Metropolitan Remainer, and they're not going to fight. I mean, they're not going to win any wars, are they? I mean, they're drinking their lattes. Plus, if they all went to war, who's going to be left to tell us what to do? I mean, so I did a little Substack about this, nickdixon.substack.com, and a little plug there as well. And I said, the problem is, I said, the ultra individuated liberal anywhere man, as coined by David Goodhart, is a concept antithetical to the patriotic collectivist effort required for war. Or perhaps more accurately, the collective we are being asked to identify with is so vast, whether it be the citizen of Europe cited by so many post-Brexit Twitter bios, or the globalist who sees the world as one big trading blob, that we simply cannot feel any sentimental attachment to it. We are atomized, disinterested parties in the corporate monstrosity. The work experience kid expected to care whether McDonald's or Coca-Cola increase their profits that quarter. But it's worse than that because, as Stanley implies, the corporation is actively attacking us. So you should go and check out my post on it on Substack. Sorry to read my own post. It's a bit self-indulgent, but I probably made the point better there. Why would anyone sign up to fight at this point, Toby?
Yeah, I mean, it's you can perfectly understand why the number of people who say they would be willing to fight for their country is so low. Because what is it they'd be fighting for, as you say? And I don't know if you saw, but there was a really good piece by Ed West about this very issue. And he referred to a song that had been devised. It was supposed to be a new kind of, it wasn't an alternative to the national anthem, but a song that was just supposed to unite us. And I'm now looking for that and typically can't find the bloody thing. I thought I'd made a note of it. But it had absolutely absurd lyrics, which were about as far from the Marseillaise as you could possibly get, and unlikely to inspire anyone to fight and risk dying for their country. But I think one thing to bear in mind, Nick, is that often people say, when asked in polls during peacetime, that they wouldn't be prepared to fight for their country, and when it comes to war, they then are. So I think there was the famous King and Country debate at the Oxford Union in 1933. The motion was, "This House will under no circumstances fight for its King and Country," and it passed with 275 votes to 153 against. And yet, when the time came, people were very willing to fight for their country. I suppose it partly depends on who the enemy is. I don't know if there were similar polls in Ukraine before Russia invaded Ukraine, but you can imagine, for similar reasons, there was a reluctance on people's part to volunteer that they would fight for their country prior to Russia's invasion. And yet, when Russia invaded, there was no shortage of people willing to sign up. Just to give a bit of context to this, a sort of personal background to the story. My father, interestingly enough, was he was auditioning for a job at, I think, it was a think tank, and it was in something like 1938, and as part of the application process, you had to write a kind of a skeleton of a policy paper, and he left it to the last minute, essay crisis mode, and found a book by Lytton Strachey in the LSE library. He was at the LSE, making the argument that introducing conscription during the First World War in 1916 was very late, and actually we would have fared much better had we introduced conscription before the outbreak of the First World War, or to coincide with the outbreak. And so my father extrapolated this to the present international situation and said it would be very sensible of the British government to prepare to introduce conscription on the eve of war with Germany, should it happen, rather than wait like they had done during the First World War. Anyway, instead of writing the skeleton, he ended up staying up all night and writing this paper, making the argument for conscription. And the think tank was so impressed, not only did they offer him a job, they published this policy paper. And it was read by Winston Churchill. And Churchill thought it was absolutely brilliant, because that's exactly what he thought. And he contacted my father through his private secretary and offered my father a job working for him. My father was going to take the job, but he was then vetted because Churchill was an MP, so he had to go through a positive vetting procedure, and he failed the vetting because he had until quite recently been a member of the Communist Party. But had he not been a member of the Communist Party, on the strength of this paper that he wrote one night in the LSE library applying for this job, he might have been, right next to Churchill throughout the Second World War.
Wow. Your dad was a communist, so he
was
didn't get a
originally a
job with
communist.
Churchill. That's
Yeah.
absolutely mental. That's incredible. There's so much that's crazy about that. Wow. I don't even know how to follow that, really. So would you sign up, though, Toby?
Well, I saw Boris's piece in the Mail saying, reporting for duty, sir, doing an impression of who was the character in Dad's Army, the corporal. Anyway, doing an impression of him. My initial reaction was, yes, I would sign up, but I don't think they'd take me any more than they'd take Boris, because I'm 60, and I think that would probably mean that I wasn't eligible. But if would I pretend to be, 55? I think I could get away with it. I think
that's still over the cutoff, isn't it? The cutoffs. I heard someone said it was 42. I don't know. I just heard that last night. Is that true?
Is it 42? Okay.
I don't know where that came from. Paul Cox told me, and I don't know if he's in charge of it.
Right.
He's just a comedian on TV.
So would you still be in the frame?
No, I would, because I'm 36, is it? So it's it would be a big problem for me. the way I looked at, here you go. National Service Act imposed conscription on all males between 18 and 41. That was Second
Right.
World War. So if they
Right.
could go with that again,
Yeah.
that'd be interesting.
I
Oh no,
guess.
I'm gonna have to change all my dating profiles. I'm not even on them, but
I guess. I guess the
because I can
major
pass for 36.
the
They've
major
told me.
concern for me would be my son. So I've got an 18-year-old, a 16-year-old, and a 15-year-old.
Mm,
So if war comes in 3 years, then all three of my sons would be eligible for the draft, and that would be pretty alarming. I think I'd
yeah,
probably be more willing to fight myself than to uh, allow my children to be called up. Um, I mean, I think that the I still believe in enough. I still have a vestige of patriotism, enough of one to think it would be worth risking my own life to defend the country. But I'm not sure I'm patriotic enough to think it would be worth risking my children's life to defend the country.
interesting. Yeah, I mean that would. Yeah, I certainly wouldn't want to see your kids go to war. It looks like I would just miss the cutoff, so maybe I should start being a real jingoist. But I just can't be because I mean I made this point on X. Sorry to read out one of my exes, but this one of my exes, this weird volunteer woman was telling off the lady for singing gospel songs outside the church. She said you can't sing church songs outside the church ground, and it was just some volunteer, some made up force. And I don't know what the name of it is. And this has gone viral. And she was completely making it up anyway. She was wrong. She had the laws wrong. Then at the end of the video, she sticks her tongue out in a kind of perfect gesture for how the sort of neoliberal establishment has been treating us all these years. And I just said, this is the country they want us to sign up and fight for. If we lost and were taken over by authoritarians who didn't share our values, how would we know? I mean, the woman's got like a sort of European accent. It turns out to be from Bulgaria. She could have easily been Russian or German. Like, how would we know if a sort of European or Eastern country had taken over? I mean, it'd be exactly the same, wouldn't it, Toby? We've already been taken over.
Well, it might be. It might be that uh, if we were well, I suppose it would depend on who took us over. I mean, I guess if we were invaded by North Korea, things would probably change quite dramatically. Less so if we were invaded by a kind of EU army. I imagine if we were invaded by an EU army, it would make zero difference.
Yeah, and if we were invaded by Russia, they might allow the Christian songs. They might even force us to do the Christian songs, which would be better.
Yeah. I guess the unwillingness of enough people to fight for Britain to be able to raise an army capable of repelling an invader is one of the foreseeable consequences of the sustained attack on nationalism since the Second World War. So the architects of the EU thought that the way to avoid another European world war was to unleash this sustained attack on nationalism, to try and dissolve national borders, to try and make people put the good of Europe before the good of their own country. And to a certain extent, you could argue that's worked. There have been conflicts between European countries since 1945, but there hasn't been anything resembling the Second or First World War. Germany seems to have been contained. Its territorial ambitions, for the most part, contained, diverted into financial dominance instead of territorial dominance of the European landmass, etc. But the problem with that solution to regional conflicts is that it has left us vulnerable to attack from a very nationalistic power on the borders of the European Union, such as Russia. Although, having said that, all this talk, about Russia potentially posing a threat in 2 or 3 years' time, and the need to prepare for that threat. That's not terribly credible, given the huge difficulty that Russia has got into merely fighting Ukraine. Maybe that word merely belittles the enormous sacrifices and the courage shown by Ukrainians. But if Russia, cannot successfully subdue Ukraine, is it likely that while still being embroiled in a conflict in Ukraine, Russia would extend the war to Western Europe, the Baltics? It seems at this stage anyway. Maybe if Russia wins, then it might be emboldened and have more capacity. But at the moment, it doesn't look like a particularly credible threat to the United Kingdom.
Yeah, and it depends what form it would take. I mean, they're pitching it as the new Cold War. I suppose it's more of a land war in Ukraine. Would Russia's war with us be sort of more? Would it be cyber attacks? Would it be espionage? What would it be? Would it be the poisonings? I mean, I suppose knowing Russia, it would take all forms. But I guess they're sort of positing it as a kind of good old fashioned shooting war. But I don't know. It wouldn't really. That wasn't the Cold War, was it? So I really don't know what form it would take. Well, Putin's been training up these beluga whales, hasn't he? So maybe it would largely be done aquatically via trained aquatic mammals.
Maybe the scenario being considered is that if I don't know, Sweden joins NATO and Putin attacks Sweden, then as a NATO country, we'd be expected to commit some troops to defending Sweden from Russia, something like that.
Yeah, something like that. I mean, they constantly want to bring Ukraine into NATO, don't they? Yeah, now Sweden. It's all getting very disturbing. We're just at constant war. I think we should all just relax and accept we're all at war now at all times with all countries. Basically, the whole world's at war. I suppose between NATO and the Russia, China, Iran complex, whatever you want to call it. I mean, isn't that just how it is? We've got war in Israel, we've got Yemen, Russia, Ukraine. Maybe this is going to be the new era where we're just sort of always just this massive global conflict, but it's not like a typical kinetic conflict. It's just various skirmishes and I don't know, advancements. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, there has been a lot of talk of the Third World War this week. I mean, Trump said he thought a Third World War was likely. Hitchens wrote a piece which we summarized in the Daily Sceptic, in which he said he thought war was coming. He thinks that that's partly because Europe's current generation of leaders, unlike earlier generations, have had no immediate first-hand experience of the horror of war, and therefore might allow themselves to be drawn into a war, might be less guarded against that. And I think he thinks that the support that Britain and the EU have been giving to Ukraine, which is perpetuating that conflict, is dangerous and may yet see us being sucked into war with Russia. So I think that's one of his concerns. By the way, did you see that the EU drew up a secret plan to threaten Viktor Orban if Hungary didn't sign off on a new, was it a 50 billion euro aid package to Ukraine? Pretty horrifying. And also not terribly credible, because Hungary has its own currency. So, the EU doesn't have as much leverage over Hungary's economy as this secret plan seemed to assume.
And people said that they'd be even bolder if it wasn't for Brexit, which has got them a little scared. So, yeah, but they'd bully Hungary even more. I know it's disgusting. I can't stand the EU. It just shows what they're like. A couple of extra things on the army thing. And just on that woman, by the way, who told off the other woman for singing gospel songs. There was a follow-up article on it. It said that she was a jet-setting Costa Coffee employee. I didn't know there were any jet-setting Costa Coffee employees. She turned out to be a 20-year-old from Bulgaria. Why is a 20-year-old Costa Coffee employee from Bulgaria telling us we can't sing Christian songs? So that really made me angry. And just on your other point of have we faced up to the reality of war, there was a recruitment ad on Fortnite which got binned after being branded sick and disturbing. Did you see that? It was actually quite a well-made advert. So it was an advert that sort of mimicked Fortnite, the game, but you're joining the army.
Right.
And you said you belong in the army. and it got binned, and it wasn't even clear that it went along with Fortnite's creator rules. That it went against their guidelines, but the army were just trying it because they're trying anything desperately, and people are pointing out how sort of sick it is because it's aimed at children. So maybe children are the key to fighting this war. They'll be playing Fortnite. Oh, look, I could join the army. It'll be just like Fortnite, and then we send them to go to Russia. I mean, it is pretty worrying, but it shows how desperate they are.
Yeah, they are desperate. Did you see there was a great although very profane clip from a sort of white van man kind of laughing about the fact that the British Army couldn't find anyone to volunteer, and he was sort of essentially he was a sort of a typical white working class young man, and he was essentially making the point that for decades the kind of white working class have been demonized, cast out, looked down on by everybody, thought to be this kind of wretched underclass who just need constantly re-educating. And he sort of I think he was a Millwall supporter, so he kept comparing white working class males to Millwall fans. Yeah, everybody hates us. And then he says, and now they want us to fight for them, to defend the country. Now they want to call us up. Who else can do the fighting? It's not these soy boys, is it? It's people like us. Now they want us to do their fighting, having shat on us for decades. They now want us to go and risk our lives to protect them. It was great stuff. I was much more sweary than that. I've left out all the profanities, but it was great, and it's
not quite as loud as that. Go on.
No, but it's interestingly, someone sent this to me along with that Kipling poem. It's Tommy this and Tommy that, and that's been a perennial complaint of our soldiering class for centuries. It's actually one of the themes of the Sharp novels as well, that it's the scum of Britain, the wretched, the dispossessed, the looked down upon, the scorned, who end up doing the fighting and turn out to be the backbone of the nation.
Absolutely, and the attacks on those people are worse than ever. And why should they fight? This is what I say in my piece. Wars have been won in this country by working class men with moral compasses and a lack of other opportunity, combining with posh men with an inherent sense of duty and thin mustaches, and that's how we win these things. Whereas what this idea of but who does the neoliberal globalist ideology, whatever you want to call it, appeal to? The person in the middle, the metro person, the people in my football team, the people with a solid job and 3 kids working in the extended blob who hate the country, love Europe, or they pretend to like the country. They like Keir Starmer, they like football now, but they're the only people the ideology appeals to, but they're not going to fight. Or if they do, like I say, there'll be no one left to tell us what to do and be annoying. But yeah, the working class, why would they fight? And then, there's also that cut off, isn't there, between it used to be Boris is kind of harking back to that. He's trying to sort of let's all bloody join up. But that used to be that symbiosis between the aristocracy and the working man in a strange way, and I think that's broken as well now. And it's all broken. Who's going to? And as I say, the left aren't going to fight because they admit to hating the country. So, and the regime has cozied up to the left, so their values are kind of all merged together. So, who's going to fight? So those people, we've been told to despise the country. We've been told we're citizens of Europe. So what is it we're fighting for? As Tim Stanley says, you fight for home. You don't fight for an abstraction. But we've been told we don't have a home, and if we do, it's a shithole and we're scum.
And the kind of the alternative point of view is that actually we could recruit a diverse army. As many women as men, people of all ethnicities and faiths, and that they would defend diverse, open, tolerant Britain. And they'd be willing to risk their lives to defend that kind of inclusive, kind of 2012 Olympics opening ceremony vision of the country. And as Ed West said in his really good piece on his Substack about this, at one point, there were more British Muslims fighting for ISIS than there were British Muslims in the British Army. That's how enthusiastic our Muslim population is about joining the army.
Despite that army recruitment ad where the guy gets down and starts praying with his prayer mat, and it's like, oh, the diverse army. And that reminds me, the one thing I forgot to mention here was this guidance that resurfaced in light of all this, which was actually from 2017, given out to high-ranking officers, and it was leaked to the press in 2019. And this was extreme right-wing indicators and warnings. And this was sent out to the army, and it said, look out for individuals who describe themselves as patriots. That was the first one. It's hard to get any more absurd than that. You can't have patriots in the army. Another one was add Istan to British place names. So Londonistan. And then another one of my favorites, make inaccurate generalizations about the left or government. So if you were to say, oh, the government are competent or the left is benevolent, you would be an extreme right winger because those are inaccurate generalizations. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's just use the term Islamofascism. I mean, look at opponents as traitors, claim that immigration is the root of injustices against vulnerable people. But it goes on and on. I've read out some of the most absurd ones. Involve colleagues in closed social media groups. You bang out of luck there. Crouch End dog walkers are bang out of luck. What this is absolutely insane. This was given out.
Yeah, how to spot a far right extremist. It sounds like we tick every single box. So maybe they should, if they actually do want to raise an army capable of defending us from kind of Putin stormtroopers, they should just say, if you fail every single one of these tests, we want you. Sign up now. There's a signing bonus. Yeah.
Refer to political correctness as some left-wing or communist plot. Well, yes, and yes. I mean, describe multicultural towns as lost. These are funny. I mean, some of them are more extreme. Have tattoos with overt and covert extreme right-wing iconography. So if you've got a swastika on your forehead, I can go along with that one.
Presumably, a Union Jack tattoo would fall into that.
Union Jack on the upper arm. Yeah, that would be
covert far-right extremism.
Yeah, even the sort of archetypal anchor tattoo would sort of say you're supporting the Navy. Probably an imperialist. Yes, incredible. I mean, become increasingly angry at perceived injustices or threats to so-called national identity. Whoops. Oh, well. It's so ridiculous. Well, that's the army story. We've done half an hour on that. Probably enough. I think we should move on. And just for the viewer, the reason I look like shit is, and this is, I'm going to tie it to the next story, is I didn't sleep last night. I've hosted GB News the last 2 nights. And then I got in at 1 a.m. I was like, I've got to prepare for Weekly Sceptic, but I was too tired. I've got to go to bed. I went to bed at 3. Couldn't sleep till 8:05 a.m. according to my Fitbit. Didn't do my preparation. I just stayed there. It lost in indecision between the two. It's insomnia, and that's why I look and feel like crap. But another person, this is my link, who may be struggling today is poor old Laurence Fox, who's had a tough time because he's lost his libel case after calling critics paedophiles, is how the Times puts the headline. So I'm sure you followed this. He was accused by these people. What's her name? Simon Blake, a gay rights activist and former Stonewall trustee, and Crystal, a former RuPaul's Drag Race contestant. So they called him racist. And he did a classic thing I've seen loads of people do on X, formerly Twitter, which is to say, okay, well, then you're a paedophile. And I've seen loads of variations on this. And it's a straightforward rhetorical technique to say, well, if you can just call me anything, I can just call you anything if all bets are off and we don't have defamation. A perfectly normal, sort of ironic point to make. But the court seems to have taken it all very literally and said that, this is a terrible thing to call them and it was obviously damaging, seriously harmful, defamatory and baseless. And whereas when it came to the accusation of racism against Fox, they were less clear. The judge fell short of making a ruling on whether describing Fox as a racist is substantially true, which is interesting. And then the judge made a statement I found very strange and sort of partial and inappropriate. She said it's not only what he says, but how he says it that regularly ignites controversy around Mr. Fox, deliberately or otherwise. Isn't that a sort of highly subjective, almost social media commentator-esque point to make? But anyway, Toby, I'm sure there's some detail you'll pick up that I'm missing. I didn't get. Maybe I'm missing detail. The thing that seems to have really bothered Laurence today is the fact that they won't define racism, and he's been posting on X in a fair amount of dismay, it seems like, and I hope he's okay. He says, I haven't slept a wink. That was the link with me. So forgive me if this is rambling. Thoughts on yesterday's judgment. 6 times judges have now been asked to define what a racist is. Still no answer. The Court of Appeal specifically asked a judge in this case to define the word, and yet she is not. It baffles me as to how a term which has not been defined can be defamatory or not. Surely, in order to determine defamation, you would need to know what the meaning of the alleged defamatory term is. The judge has dodged this question by saying that no suffered serious harm has been suffered by myself. He's a bit tired. If losing your entire career does not meet the threshold for serious harm, then I don't know what does. It is also now free reign for anyone to call anyone a racist if there's nothing you can do about it. It also makes the word racist itself utterly meaningless. And he goes on and say it just basically means you can't fight back or defend yourself. And he's appealed before and won, so he's going to appeal. But he says he feels utterly bereft and totally hopeless, which I can sympathise with. What do you think, Toby?
Yeah, it does seem like a harsh judgment to have effectively. I mean, as I understand it, when he was called a racist by the two people you've mentioned and a third person who is an actress, he retaliated by calling them pedos. As you say, it was not an accusation intended to be taken at face value. He didn't actually think that any of these people were in fact pedos. He was simply making the point that if they can accuse him of being a racist with what he thought was no evidence, then he's perfectly entitled to accuse them of being pedos with no evidence either. And he was just trying to illustrate how unfair it was to call him a racist because of comments he'd made about Sainsbury's. I can't remember the exact context, but didn't seem like a particularly racist thing to say, as I recall. Anyway, he then fought back when they decided to sue him for libel by countersuing them for libeling him by calling him a racist, and the judge has concluded that he libeled them by calling them pedos, but they didn't libel him by calling him a racist. Although the judgment seemed to be slightly more nuanced than that, and the judge said that he simply hadn't produced enough evidence that the accusation that he's a racist had caused him harm, whereas they apparently had produced sufficient evidence to satisfy the judge that him calling them pedos had actually caused them harm. Anyway, so he said that he's going to appeal it, and I guess he'll have to wait and find out whether the Court of Appeal will give him leave to do that. But on the face of it, it does seem quite a one-sided and partial judgment.
I assume the other person you're referring to is Nicola Thorpe, who's written long posts about it. She was involved as well, wasn't she? She says we won on all counts. He said she hasn't really won, but he apparently because her case was thrown out. That's what I don't understand what that refers to. I've been a bit behind this. What does he mean when he says her case was thrown out? The original defamation case, and then they've won the him countersuing, but they didn't win the original defamation. Is that right?
I'm not sure exactly what the difference was there.
Yeah, I've not been able to work that out either. Because I only got a certain amount of bandwidth, and the amount of legal cases Laurence has, I don't always have the bandwidth for them, though I certainly wish him well. But he does do a lot of legal cases because as he says, he's not paying for them; they're funded, so he can do this. And it is important. I mean, it is odd. I mean, certainly no one could argue him being called racist initially wasn't incredibly damaging to him. This is a separate instance of him being called racist. The initial time when he was first cancelled, when he appeared on Question Time, that was massively damaging, wasn't it?
Yes. Yes. I mean, I imagine I didn't follow the case particularly closely, but I imagine part of the defense against the accusation that they had damaged his career by calling him a racist was that, plenty of things he did contributed to the fact that he can no longer get work as an actor, and this wasn't decisive in rendering him unemployable as an actor. I know from having kind of been asked by various people who've been accused of being racists before whether the Free Speech Union can do anything to help them. It's not a kind of typical Free Speech Union case because it would take a lot, I think, for us to help someone sue someone for libel. But when I've talked to defamation specialists about this, the general view is that if you call someone a paedophile and there, and you don't and you don't have any evidence to support that charge, that's more straightforwardly defamatory, because you're making a factual assertion which they can show isn't true. If you accuse someone of being a racist, that's much harder to disprove because it feels more like an expression of opinion rather than a reference to factually checkable things. So it's much harder, I think, to prove that you're not a racist than it is to prove you're not a paedophile.
Yeah, certainly more subjective term, but there should be a much higher burden of proof when calling someone a racist because it's so damaging in our ultra liberal culture. It's the worst possible thing you can be called. It's actually arguably worse than being called a paedophile. I mean, if you look at the treatment of some paedophiles in the country or some gangs, let's say rape gangs, who's been treated worse? I mean, that famously in the grooming gang scandal, the point was people were so worried about being called racist, they turned a blind eye to the rape of children. Therefore, you could surmise in our culture, it's worse to be called a racist than it is to rape children. I mean, there it is. It sounds insane, but that's basically what we could draw from those multiple
Mm,
cases. So, therefore, there should be a much higher bar to call someone a racist. You should have to have some sort of proof.
yeah, I guess it's the the difficulty in bringing a libel suit against someone who calls you a racist is that when someone calls you a racist, often they're putting a particularly negative, uncharitable spin on something you've said, and it's often takes the form of speculating about motive, doesn't it? So people who voted for Brexit were accused of being racists because why else would they support Brexit? People who are anti-immigration, Nigel Farage is accused of being racist, including by David Cameron at one point, who famously described the UKIP as the BNP in blazers. So there's always a kind of speculative element, and it always kind of there's usually a speculative element anyway, and it often involves a claim by the person making the accusation to be able to see inside the kind of rotting, putrid soul of the person they're accusing of racism. They're claiming a kind of special insight into the psychology of the person they're attacking, and that's quite hard to disprove. It's quite hard to prove a negative when accused of having a rotting soul.
Yeah, exactly. And as you say, Farage has been accused of that by Nat West, amongst others. And yeah, I think I don't think I'm going to top my prior point, which is so good. I'm almost thinking, should I post that and get in trouble? But my point about the people's fears about being called racist is so extreme; they turn a blind eye to rape. So it proves the point. We need a if you can just go around calling someone a racist and destroy their career, that can't be right, can it? It just can't be right. So we need judges to reckon with that, and that's why Fox keeps going back for a definition, because we have a simple definition in the dictionary, but the left have kind of rejected that definition because it doesn't involve oppression and power and all this nonsense, but obviously means treating someone
Mm.
differently in a prejudicial way according to their race or whatever the literal words are. But it's pretty straightforward. It's weird that they won't define that. Anyway, let's see. Let's see if he gets any further with his other cases. I hope he does all right. I mean, he's there talking about how words don't matter anymore and we need a revolution. Politics don't work. And, it's this point that's been made in various places, which is that you push people out. Lawrence was just trying to be an actor and you push people further and further into a corner. I mean, what are they supposed to do? The way we treat people now, they're not allowed in society if we deem them wrongins with wrong think. We want to unperson them, and you just push people to more and more extremes. Not saying that Lawrence is being extreme. He's just frustrated about his case. I'm not saying he's really going to, I don't know, do anything crazy, but it's just, you know, you just feel that people are left with no avenues. They're just you don't allow them into society. What they're going to do? Even criminals do their time. Hardened
Mm.
criminals, and well, a lot of them are let out pretty blooming quickly these days. But they're let out, and we're supposed to say you've done your time. But I suppose it's
Mm.
not an original thought. But with cancel culture, you never do your time. You're just unpersoned and on the outskirts, becoming more and
Yes.
more extreme in
Well,
your thoughts.
yeah,
Perhaps.
I was, and it's a good point that the woke seem far more willing to forgive, you know, um, a child murderer, to put it at its most extreme, than they do someone who's breached the kind of dogma of equity, diversity, and inclusion. And why is that? Because on the face of it, it just seems completely absurd. Why is it that there wasn't more uproar about the fact that the killer in the Nottingham case had a plea of manslaughter accepted, or was it diminished responsibility? But in any event, he could be in prison for as little as 2 years.
He's going
And
to hospital instead of prison
he's going to hospital
because
instead of prison.
he's psychotic. But it's like, we're still the same guy.
Yeah.
Of course, he's a psycho. He bangs on people's doors. He assaults people. Now he's planned to kill someone, killed them because he's a psycho. So he should be in jail. I don't get that. But he was out of his normal mind. It was a bizarre kind of philosophical question. But yeah, sorry.
Yeah, and then there's this case of the Sam Melia. Is that what he's called? He supposedly, well, he's been convicted. He was convicted last week, I think, but in a jury trial. And one of the things he was convicted for was encouraging his supporters to put these stickers on road signs and street signs and so forth. So it was a conspiracy to cause or encouraging others to commit criminal damage, and it was racially aggravated because he's a member of some right-wing group. But he hasn't attacked anyone. As far as we know, he's never assaulted anyone. He's never committed burglary, or he's never mugged anyone. It's essentially, he's a member of a far right political organization, although not a prescribed political organization. But in any event, because he's seemingly an organizer for this right wing group, he's been found guilty of stirring up hatred and guilty of encouraging people to commit criminal damage. And he's going to be sentenced on the 1st of March. And apparently the minimum tariff for what he's been sentenced for, found guilty of, is 3 years. Could go to prison for longer. But it does seem odd, doesn't it, that in our society, these kinds of thought crimes should be punished much more severely than, well, in the case of the Nottingham chap, than murder.
Yeah.
And why is that? Is it partly because is it a bit like, well, you can tell me in a minute, but it reminded me of 1984 and the fact that it's only really amongst members of the kind of educated professional managerial class that Big Brother two-way screens are in their flats, their houses. The proles can get away with, dissent, rebellion, wrongthink in a way that members of the professional middle class can't, and professional managerial class can't. And is it partly that? I mean, okay, this guy Sam Melia, not a member of the professional managerial class, but is it to send a message to members of that class that you shouldn't deviate from the kind of current orthodoxy when it comes to things like EDI, and if you do, you're for the high jump. Whereas crimes which largely affect only the working class are much less severely punished. They're much more concerned with policing the thought of members of the professional managerial class and sending messages to them about what happens if they dissent or go off piste than they are about actually policing ordinary crimes like theft and burglary and mugging and murder.
No, there's something in that. Well, it's a little different. There's something in that. They do target certain people more strictly than others, but then you can already contradict that immediately by looking at the very different treatment of Tommy Robinson versus Douglas Murray. And I always say Douglas Murray is just Tommy Robinson with a posh accent. Murray's got away with it far more, saying the same. I say got away with it, just saying the same things. I mean, than Robinson, because he expresses it in a more genteel fashion. So that goes against that. My explanation is different. Look at Kenneth Eugene Smith, just executed in Alabama. The puff pieces on this guy. He murdered a woman in 1988. Now, granted, they've messed around. It's taken a long time. The method of killing was not great, which was this nitrogen hypoxia. It took 22 minutes, and they tried to kill him with lethal injection in November 22. And I now have this whole case memorized ridiculously. It's kind of bizarre. But and by the way, the jury voted 11-1 to let him off, and the judge overrode it, if that's the correct word, in a practice that's now been outmoded, which is this judicial override they've now got rid of. So I don't agree with that because I think the jury should decide. However, he did kill a woman in 1988 now, and he was paid for $1,000. Very cheap life there. So the puff pieces on this guy from The Guardian, I was reading this long Guardian piece. It took them to the third page to even mention, I think it was like something like 18 paragraphs to even mention that he'd killed someone. I'm like, why is the guy? I was like, this is interesting. A straight white man. Normally, the Guardian hates them, but when do they like them? When they've murdered someone, then they win back some points in the Guardian's sick world view. And then I saw even the Mail, I think it was, had a kind of graphic novel of how the execution went down. It was like a cartoon picture with, oh, there's the person crying, and this has happened at this time, and this happened. I was like, why is this guy getting the graphic novel treatment? It's like the media love this guy. They love this guy because he's a murderer, and they're just an outpouring of love for these people. Why? Ultimately, the only answer is subversion. They want to subvert and destroy society. If you look at The Guardian, what is your worldview if stripped back? That's what it is. It's the straight white man who does his best and has a family and is a Christian and wants things to go well and everyone to be happy and believe in God and say your prayers and eat your greens. He's evil. But the Alabama murderer, he is the oppressed. He is the underclass. Oh, he's so oppressed. So in that case, you're right that the working class or the underclass get away with more because they are romanticized by these people as as the underdogs. As long as, but not if they're Tommy Robinson making sort of edgy points about Islam that the establishment doesn't like, but only if they're murdering women. But you go, hang on, doesn't the establishment like women? Well, no, not anymore, because we know they've erased women. Women are gone now with Stonewall and all that. But murdering a woman in 1988 is suddenly a positive if you become a kind of hard luck story because you're being killed and it's the death penalty and we're against the death penalty, therefore we become pro murderer. So at the heart of it is just an inherently subversive, destructive worldview that wants to tear down society. I think it comes down to that.
It may also, yeah, I mean, it's. I mean, if you unpack the term anarcho-tyranny, which is quite a good term to describe this state of affairs and this kind of double standard in the criminal justice system, whereby essentially our inner cities, particularly outside London, every Friday and Saturday night are lawless zones, virtually unpoliced, and that's the anarchy bit. And then the tyranny bit is that speech crimes are zealously investigated and prosecuted. And one of the reasons is, as you say, it's because this new woke ideology means that they have a kind of misplaced sympathy for anyone who can cast themselves as a victim of oppression, including hardened criminals, but no sympathy at all for white heterosexual men who commit speech crimes. It's partly also a kind of resources issue, isn't it? In that, for the police to prosecute someone for assaulting someone else outside a pub on a Saturday night in Nottingham city centre, that requires, to actually stop them doing it would require putting themselves in harm's way. So they're less likely to do that than they are to arrest someone for, misgendering a drag queen. But in addition, probably those, the speech crimes are easier to investigate. You can sit at your desk in the police station and kind of comb through what people have said on their social media accounts and find evidence that they've committed speech crimes, without ever getting up off your ass. You don't have to wear out any shoe leather to kind of secure a conviction. So that may partly be a reason why the police are much more focused, seemingly, on speech crime than they are on, burglary.
Yeah, I think all those things you said, and I was going to say anarcho-tyranny, and you're right to bring that up. And a quick definition here: a system of government that fails to enforce or adjudicate protection to its citizens while simultaneously persecuting innocent conduct. And that is the key. And that is absolutely what we have now. That woman saying the other woman can't sing gospel songs on the street. You come up with endless examples: hate, non-crime, hate incidents, all these kind of things. That's the key thing. You have to punish, or protecting the rape gangs, all these kind of things. You have to punish the innocent while letting off the guilty.
Yes.
This is our society.
Yeah. And I think that's partly, I mean, that was a kind of a great example of a narco tyranny, wasn't it? The interview with that. What was she like? A community police officer, a volunteer police officer? But, essentially, she's there on what, Oxford Street, on a busy shopping day when, no doubt, shoplifting is taking place on an industrial scale. She's doing F all about that, and her focus is on stopping someone singing a Christian song outside a church. I mean, why is she prioritizing that rather than, allowing retailers to kind of go about their business and protecting them from shoplifters? Why is that the police's priority? And I'm sure she's not. I'm sure, she was probably doing what was expected of her by her superiors and not just kind of, making it up on the spot, even though she did get the law wrong.
I'm not sure. She should be deported. That's what we do know. She's from Bulgaria. Deport immediately. But yeah, good question, Toby. And why are there those laws in California allowing up to £1,000 of shoplifting, all these, and then companies moving out of California? Absolute insanity. Yeah, it's a narco tyranny. I mean, what can you say? It's just so sickening, isn't it? I almost can't talk about it, but we have talked about it, and I think we've dealt with it pretty well. That was all off the back of the Laurence Fox case, but I think it was pretty interesting. Well, good luck to Laurence. I mean, I've defended him on GB News. Controversial, isn't it? Talk about Laurence on GB. I was like, I'm going to get in trouble, but I defended him. I've seen some people attacking me already on X, but mainly because someone sent it to me. But yeah, I mean, there we go. I think we should move on and do it. It's not exactly a light story, but it's a slightly lighter, which is party politics, and it's Kemi Badenoch has. So here's one from the Express. Kemi, stirring Tory plotters must stop messing around. So Kemi's in all sorts of. She's the subject of all sorts of speculation about whether she's running as leader or about to run or considering it. And she's of course ruled it out because it's very hard to say, oh yeah, the current guy's rubbish, I'm going to unseat him ASAP. It's very hard to say that. So she's denied it. There have been various polls. Interesting poll from GB News. You'd think would like Kemi, but she didn't fare well at all. It was a preferred choice to replace Rishi Sunak. Farage 8%, not even in the Tories. Boris Johnson 7%, not even an MP, is he? And Penny Mordaunt 7%. Suella Braverman 2%. None of the above 51%. So suggesting that maybe GB News think the whole thing is broken. But then there was another interesting poll, and Kemi fared much better here from Conservative members. She was plus 64%. Penny was plus 48. Esther McVeigh plus 31. Grant Shapps plus 12. Lol. James Cleverly plus 10. Lord Cameron minus 5. Jeremy Hunt minus 17. Rishi Sunak minus 26. So look at that swing. Minus 26 to plus 64 for Kemi amongst the members. That is an absolute, beyond the drubbing, it's an absolute obliteration.
And it indicates that if there was a leadership election and Kemi got into the final two, she would win it by a landslide amongst the members. She made some effort on Sunday to distance herself from the plotters. I mean, I think we were quite ahead of the curve with this story, Nick. We were talking about a potential plot to unseat Rishi Sunak at least 3 weeks ago, possibly 4 weeks ago. And the story's only really... Here. Yeah,
we probably influence events. Maybe we influenced the whole event. Maybe we have certain high-profile listeners. Maybe they thought, oh yeah, maybe let's unseat him.
Anyway, the story that there is a plot to unseat Rishi Sunak has kind of broken through into the mainstream media in the past week, really, and I suppose partly prompted by this poll that Lord Frost interpreted for the Telegraph and paid for by this mysterious group whom no one can identify and no one had heard of before.
Conservative Britain Alliance.
Conservative Britain Alliance, yeah.
And then this Will Dry character who was a pollster for Rishi who quit in last November and was partly behind this poll.
Yes. It sounds like he helped YouGov devise the questions. So it looks as though the poll was cooked up by the plotters. but you know, if you do essentially uncover a plot to unseat Rishi Sunak, then the obvious next question is, well, who do they want to put in his place? And that's how Kemi's name has been connected to the plotters. And so on Sunday, she strongly denied that she had anything to do with this plot, and said that people who were talking her up as a potential successor to Rishi Sunak before the general election, replacement before the general election, weren't her friends, and they weren't talking, with her authorization. And then yesterday, it emerged that she's actually in this WhatsApp group with Michael Gove and others, which is called Evil Plotters. So
Yeah.
that was, I guess, a little bit embarrassing. But
That was alleged, but has she actually denied that as well?
no, she hasn't. I don't think. When I checked last night, she hadn't denied that she is in this WhatsApp group. But she said, I think she said it was just perfectly normal for MPs to communicate with each other on WhatsApp, and it sounds like it may be an ironically named group rather than an actual group of people connected to the plot we've been reading about for the past week or so.
Yeah, I mean,
But
it could easily have an ironic, funny name. It could still have Michael Gove in it and have these kind of topics, but they give it a funny, ironic name because they've been accused of plotting. That's what I see as most likely.
Yeah.
I'm surprised you're not in it, Toby.
Yeah. But
Yeah,
I suppose it's not all that surprising that defenders of Rishi Sunak should, counterattack by trying to expose the plotters, to identify who their champion is, who's funding them, etc. So that seems to be the direction of travel at the moment. I think, clearly someone in the Rishi camp discovered that Kemi and Michael Gove were in this group called Evil Plotters and leaked it to the Times. But I think this will rumble on. We've got 2 by-elections, local elections, a mayoral election, all coming up, and particularly the 2 by-elections. And so it looks like speculation about Rishi's future is not going to end anytime soon.
Do you think if Kemi got in now, she still survives the general election? Because I was thinking about it, and I think she does. I think Rishi loses the general election and has to go. But if Kemi came in so late, she'd be like, well, I haven't really had a chance. I'm just starting, and, I was never going to win it. I did better than people thought, maybe, or something. Or if she doesn't, well, we knew this was going to happen. It was mainly on the Rishi. I think she would still survive. Ideally, it would be after the election, but I still think she'd survive either way. But do you think she's enough? That's one. Go answer that one first, yeah.
Well, yeah, I think if she took over from Rishi Sunak and led the Conservatives into the next general election, I think the likelihood is Labour would still win an overall majority and form the next government. But I can see a pathway to stopping that happening if Kemi is the leader, and I can't see a pathway to stopping that happening anymore for Rishi Sunak if he remains the leader. I think that, as we've discussed before, if Rishi decided to resign and there was a coronation rather than a contest, Kemi is made the leader, and then in pretty short order calls a general election on the single issue of immigration. So the issue is there's nothing we can really do about the small boats. We tried to put this Rwanda solution in place. It failed. And we can't do anything about it while we remain part of the European Convention on Human Rights. So I'm fighting this election on that very issue, that single issue. And you kind of make it into kind of like, the Brexit referendum 2.0, a referendum about sovereignty, about immigration, about taking back control, about the future of Britain, about who we are as a country and what we want to be, and do we want to protect our national identity and have properly defended borders or not. I think in that scenario, if she played her cards perfectly, I think not only could she succeed in depriving Keir of an overall majority, I think the Tories under her could win a small majority.
Wow. Bold. I'm not so convinced, but to me, I really like Kemi. She's very clear. She's very smart. She's likable. Is she enough, given how bad the situation is, how broken our politics is? I'm not sure, but maybe. I mean, I could see Starmer getting in and destroying the country, obviously, and then Kemi could be the Thatcher to his Callaghan if he's struggling with the unions, if he's struggling with the economy, if he's struggling obviously with wokeness and the general depravity of Labour, and you and me are in prison, and you could see Kemi coming in, and Thatcher was in opposition to Callaghan, and that's how she began. So maybe, but is she enough? Do we need? I just think we need Farage. We need someone, that sort of revolutionary. The idea that Farage, it's be such a reshaping of politics. I don't know how he does it, and we discussed it ad nauseum, but it is Kemi enough to really get the Tories back out of the wilderness, or is she just a punchy wilderness candidate getting some blows in against Starmer in PMQs?
Yeah, I mean, we don't know the answer to that question, and it's really hard to tell. You don't know how people are going to respond when they become leader of the party, prime minister, and seemingly the Conservative Party's become quite bad at picking leaders. I mean, people are divided about how effective David Cameron was, but he was probably the most effective of the leaders since, certainly more effective than his successors. Not necessarily at winning elections, but at kind of managing the party and running the country. All his successors have proved to be pretty poor in various respects. So it's really hard to tell, I think, ahead of time whether someone's going to be any good in that role. But being the eternal optimist, I think that Kemi would be good in that role. I think she would rise to the occasion. I think she would grow into the office. I think she has a kind of natural authority. She has fantastic instincts. She has good people around her. I share most of her policy positions. I think she's pretty closely aligned with us when it comes to woke, when it comes to immigration, when it comes to Britain's national identity. So I think, as I say, I still think even if she was leader, Keir would probably win a majority. But I think that we'd have a chance of stopping that happening under her. And I can't see us having a chance under anyone else, including Rishi Sunak. And I do also think, I mean, one of the kind of, the most powerful arguments, the most persuasive arguments against changing leader before the general election is, the public would just grow absolutely sick and tired of the Conservatives constantly playing musical chairs in Downing Street as the country goes to the dogs. And it would just kind of underline the impression that the Conservative Party is in disarray and there needs to be a change of government. They've been in power for too long. But I do think that Kemi would be good enough to offset the hit of changing the leader so close to a general election.
Okay, well, so it remains to be seen, is she Michael Howard or Margaret Thatcher? And I've invented the phrase punchy wilderness candidate, which I like. Cameron, as you say, was more effective, but he was effective at imposing or continuing the Blairite agenda. So do you want someone to be effective at bad things? It's the Hitler question. I think I'm still with the none of the above 51% from GBs, although I'm not, because I'm Farage, so I'm not none of the above. But I am sort of disillusioned with the whole thing and wonder if we need proportional representation. I'm not sure one person, woman or man, can fix it. I will just add one quick thing. I saw a video, and it was the BBC, so we know it's rigged and all that, but it was basically normies. And I suddenly realized, you spend all this time on politics, and you watch one video, and you're like, why do I bother? It was normies being asked who should be PM, political person or not political. They said some of them said Carol Vorderman.
Oh, yeah.
What some of them said Martin Lewis. Is that his name? The money guy.
Yeah.
So one of them said Alex Ferguson, and now at least a good leader and manager, though he is a socialist, but at least a highly successful best manager of all time. For me, as a lifelong United fan, the socialism would be the problem still. Carol Vaughan, and he's just like, who are these fuckwits? Why am I bothering? Like an IQ 95, just low information voters. I'm just like, why am I bothering? As much as I love the people in the abstract, when you actually, come face to face with them, they're pretty dumb.
Yeah, it's. I guess it's. It's testimony to just what low regard the general public hold our politicians if they think that Carol Vorderman would be preferable to any of the kind of current lot. It's a shocker. I read that too. Very depressing. And
I was watching a video. The video's even worse. You read it? Is an article about it?
yeah, there was an article
The
about it.
video is just, oh, that Carol Vorderman's good. It's just like, fucking hell. Oh, it's just, oh, I don't know. Where do you begin with that? But people said to me, no, this is not normies, Nick. This is your sort of BBC, what's the word?
Interestingly, though, I mean, I guess
Curated normies.
Trump, before he became a candidate, was a kind of, amongst other things, a big TV personality. Can you think of any TV personalities who actually wouldn't mind being prime minister? Is I guess Lord Frost.
Well, I'm on TV.
No, I mean, sorry. I mean, what's he called? Not the other, the other Lord Frost. No, what's he? I've mixed up. Who's the guy who does The Apprentice? Alan
Sugar.
Sorry,
he's
Sugar,
one of the people
Frost.
they mentioned, Toby. You're just one of the normies.
Is he? Okay.
And you can't even remember his name, so you're kind of normie with dementia. Now, I would say I'm on TV. I would pick me. Apart from me, Clarkson. If we're going to sound just like the normies,
yeah,
that's a solid normie choice.
Yeah.
I've been told off for using the phrase normies before. Imagine how that person's going to feel about this section.
Piers Morgan is his name's sometimes thrown out there, isn't it? When Ladbrokes have, they sometimes, when they ask who's going to be the next prime minister, kind of like the candidate who has the worst odd, but somehow has crept into the list is Piers Morgan.
Yeah, he'd be the absolute worst. Absolute zero conviction. Even less conviction than a career politician, which is incredible. I'm trying to think of someone. I'm very tired. I'm struggling. I don't watch TV, so I am really struggling. I can't really think of anyone. I've gone immediately to me. Andrew Doyle. I'm just thinking of GB News. Farage is already on there. Mog's already on there. And I don't watch these other channels. I don't know who's on them. I've got no idea.
Yeah.
Not Reacher, because season 2 is rubbish. But otherwise, Reacher season 1, he could have done it. I'm trying to let me have a think about that. Maybe someone will come to me later, but I'm really, really struggling. Which does show you the crop of our TV presenters who could potentially be prime minister just isn't what it was, Toby. It's not what it means. It could have been Dimbleby. He's gone. It's not going to be Fiona Bruce, is it?
No.
So yeah, I can't think of anyone. I mean, who is there even on the telly? Shocking.
Andrew Neil, perhaps.
No, because he threw GB under the bus. And he was terrible on vaccines and vaccine passports, particularly. No, Neil's gone. Who else is on the blooming telly? I don't watch it. Claudia Winkleman.
Anyway, Claudia Winkleman.
that's the kind of ultimate normie session. That Claudia Winkleman's good, isn't she? Nice hair. Yeah. Anyway, shocking.
She'd be better than I'd definitely vote for Claudia over Carol. That's for sure.
True. All right. Well, did you want to quickly? I haven't got it in front of me, but did you want to quickly do this university foreign students scam, whereby foreign students have to basically get an E to get in, and domestic British students have to get like an AAA starred plus for the same university course?
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to mention it because a friend of mine was so incensed by this Sunday Times expose, which, as you say, exposed the fact that British universities, including Russell Group universities, are prepared to admit foreign students with much lower qualifications than British students they turn away because they can get more money from foreign students. Anyway, he was this person I know was so incensed by this expose, he reached out to me and said, if you can find a plaintiff, so, an 18, 19, 20-year-old who didn't get a place at a Russell Group university, but where they can show that someone with lower qualifications than them did get a place because they were a foreign national, and they want to sue the university for discriminating against them, I will bankroll that case. So I just wanted to shout out to our listeners. If you know of anyone who fits that description, tell them to get in touch. And it's weeklysceptic@gmail.com. Is that right, Nick? Or was it the
I'm
just
Skeptic? Looking forward to
the
slew of emails. But yeah, so if any kid trying to get into uni has been shafted by a foreigner, is what you're saying, with an E, they should get in touch. That's basically it.
Yeah, ideally there'll be. I think the ideal plaintiff would probably be someone who'd got, 3 A's, had applied to 5 universities, including 3 Russell Group universities, to study economics, and hadn't been given a place anywhere. If you have a kind of rich target environment like that and a very sympathetic plaintiff, then I think it would be quite a strong case.
Okay. Well, there's a shout out for that. That was a very frustrating case. Speaking of frustrating cases, maybe we should quickly touch on this UNRWA pro-Hamas employees story so the UN has this agency for Palestinian refugees, which is just seems to be incredibly dodgy. And the UN are dodgy from the start. I mean, Bobby Conn once had a song, United Nations Under the Rule of Satan, and it's looking fairly accurate. So they had 12 employees who turned out to be pro-Hamas, and they wish victory for the Hamas attacks on October 7th. They called them heroes, and they called them martyrs. And there was a further development I don't have in front of me right now, but it was one of them was a school counselor. I mean, school counselors have changed since I was a kid. I mean, of course, we didn't have them in Cumbria in the past. You just got on with it, and you had no prospects anyway. But there was one of them was a school counselor who was helping out with Hamas and was in some way involved with one of the kidnappings. I need to check the details on that. Did you follow this shocking story, Toby?
Yeah, it is shocking. At first, it looked like just a few bad apples employed by the UN in Gaza were either members of Hamas or conspiring with Hamas. But then there was a follow-up expose in the Wall Street Journal yesterday, I think, in which they showed that actually the number of UN employees in Gaza who are linked to Gaza is far greater than that. And it really is pretty shocking. And some of the UN's employees in Gaza actually participated in the Hamas pogrom on October 7th, helped them to abduct Israeli citizens. And what's ironic about this, Nick, is that the head of the UN, Antonio Guterres, is that how you pronounce it?
Is Antonio? I know who you mean, but yeah. I mean,
anyway, he during the pandemic, he talked a lot about the infodemic posing, as great a threat as the virus, about misinformation and disinformation about COVID-19 on social media. And since then, he's doubled down on this crusade against misinformation, disinformation, and hate speech online. And he gave a big speech towards the end of last year in which he talked about what a grave threat that was and how much harm it caused. And you're thinking, in light of what's just been exposed, no. The grave threat, my friend, is not the fact that people are occasionally saying things you may disapprove of, dissenting from the globalist agenda on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. No, a far graver threat is the fact that you employ actual terrorists who participated on the worst slaughter of Jews since the Holocaust on October 7th. Physician, heal thyself.
Absolutely. And just on that school counselor story, it was in The Guardian even, a school counselor employed by the UN Aid Agency for Palestinian Refugees in Gaza was involved in kidnapping an Israeli woman during atrocities committed by Hamas on 7th of October. What madness. Yeah, absolutely disgusting. And just on while we're talking about atrocities against Jewish people, I forgot to mention when we were talking about anarcho tyranny that we've been left with Jewish people having to attack assailants in Golders Green, the Shomrim, I believe they're called, who are a voluntary community patrol group, had to deck an attacker and hold him until the police came. Did you see that?
Yeah, that was extraordinary. Yeah,
that's the world we're in now. We need our own little separate vigilante militias, whatever we to call them. We need a Christian one. We need all kinds of ones because the police aren't going to do it. So we need, I would love to see them doing it, but it's not just a Jewish community. What about the Manchester bombing? What about all these other things? What about Rotherham? We need people to, and not just those kind of crimes. We need, I don't know, don't we just need our own little separate police forces? It's looking like.
Is that what? So, are you volunteering for that, Nick? So you wouldn't sign up to defend the country in a war against Russia, but you might sign up for a kind of white ethno-nationalist kind of.
I didn't say that. I didn't say white. I might say Christian. Why, if Jewish
Okay.
people have them, why can't we have a Christian one?
Right.
Christian
Okay.
people out there, and people might say, well, Christians don't really go around bashing people up on the streets, but this one would. Yeah, I'd consider it, Toby. I was thinking about it. I would consider it. It's like, I'm bigger than some people think. I do strength training 3 times a week. Don't have any fighting techniques. Did boxing for a bit, injured my wrist. Would need to be with a gang of people, would need to be trained, would need weapons. What weapons would I get?
Well,
Taser?
you might get some pepper spray and a truncheon. One of the, I don't suppose they give you a gun, but maybe.
What armor would I have? Because I would struggle in London, given everyone's got knives and guns. If I just
Yeah,
went in, just me, with a big tall hat and a stick and like a bobby on the beat, I might struggle. I think I need protection.
need,
I need a arm,
need a
chest,
stab vest at the very least.
proof
Yeah.
vest. Ideally with guns. Then I would do it. I mean, I'd love to get
I
involved.
get when my friend Sean Langan, who's a documentary maker in conflict zones, has just in fact completed his latest documentary, in which he made in the Donbass, in Ukraine, telling the story of the conflict from the from the perspective of Russian conscripts. First time, probably last time that's ever happened. About to be shown on ITV in a couple of weeks. But anyway, I remember when he was going out to the Middle East to film a documentary, as a parting gift, I bought him this quite superior bulletproof vest from an army surplus store. It cost about, I don't know, 150 quid. And I presented it to him and he was very touched and thanked me. And then he told me that he traded it for like a packet of fags with this really attractive female foreign correspondent in the kind of international hotel in Beirut, within 24 hours of arriving, because it was really heavy and uncomfortable. He didn't want to wear it. I was like, that was the thanks I got for buying my friend this fabulous gift. The one silver
It's quite
lining
weird.
to
You could
this,
save someone's life just with like a gift, and you didn't think of it otherwise. Oh, have a bulletproof vest. Oh, I didn't think of that. Like, that's quite weird. You think that was like an essential item, not like I might get it as a gift. Wait, just put it. It's on my Christmas list. It's more of a
well,
sort
he
of
was like,
get yourself that one.
yeah. One silver lining to this UN RWA story, I don't know if you saw, but James O'Brien was railing against any suggestion that the UNRWA, which is the key UN Gaza aid agency, amongst other things, any suggestion that it should be defunded just because a few bad apples had been uncovered. He was also casting doubt on the veracity of the Israeli intelligence, which exposed these UNRWA employees of being involved in the October 7th attack. He's saying, tainted source, it's a few bad apples at most. This is not a good reason to suspend, the main source of aid to beleaguered Gazans, and ranting about it. And then Britain decided to suspend funding of this agency, and then James O'Brien's beloved EU decided to suspend the funding it's giving to the UNRWA. So, he's been left with egg on his face. So that's always good to see.
I knew that the US and UK had withdrawn funding, and Romania and some others. I didn't know. I knew the EU were thinking about it last I checked.
No,
so
I think
they did it.
I think the EU have actually done it. Yeah.
Wow. James O'Brien. It'll just nothing he won't defend if it suits his ideology. Hey, maybe he'd say the same about me. That's fine. I'll meet him in the street militia police gangs. I don't know which side. Do you think James O'Brien will have his own separate militia? It could get very complicated.
Okay. I've just checked this. It said apparently, as of one day ago, the EU says it's reviewing funding.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
For the UNRWA.
Reviewing.
Yeah.
They're being too cowardly. They're being behind the curve on it. We've just done it. US done it. They're like, oh, we're reviewing. We do hate Israel and we are pathetic, but we just want to wait. Yeah, scum. Just applies to anyone in that story. All right, that's that story nailed. Maybe do we have time to do a light-hearted story about men and women? I'm not sure. We've got so many US stories to do. I really don't know. And if I start going about men and women, I might be here all day.
That's true. But this was it was an interesting story, wasn't it? And a fantastic graph in the Financial Times showing the widening ideological gap between men and women across the West. But one of the interesting things about this graph was that the gap is smaller in the UK than it is in some other Western countries, particularly the US, where it's
Yeah.
just enormous.
Yeah, so South Korea is the most extreme gap between women and men in terms of political persuasion. The women are sort of plus 20 something liberal, and the men are like minus 20 something conservative in the swing. So they're completely at odds. And the US, they're going very much that way, according to this, and Germany too. But in the UK, the women are sort of plus 40 or 50 something liberal, lefty, and the men are like plus 20 something. So basically, well, I wrote a very quite a mature post about this. I said my reading of this is that UK women are total libtards and men are meeting them halfway out of desperation. Men should just hold frame and pull women into the conservative part of the graph, open every first date by saying women shouldn't be allowed to vote, and thank me later. Any comment, Toby? My point is, men are clearly they're adapting to women being ridiculously lefty because they want to, get somewhere. But they should just say no. They just say no, and women will eventually come to us if we just say no. Women voting was a mistake. The most conservative thing, death penalty, bang, bang, bang. Just lay those all out on the first date. Pro-life. Just go through the whole. Maybe not that one. It's a bit complicated, but just go through the whole thing. Tell them, they'll just come to you eventually. Don't you think? Men should stop being cucks.
Well, isn't there increasing evidence that actually women are taking the political views of their prospective partners more into account when deciding whether or not to date them? And that's one of the reasons, for the declining lower than replacement birth rate across the West, is because women are just increasingly less inclined. They're becoming more and more liberal, and at the same time, less and less inclined to date people with different political views to them. And men simultaneously are becoming more and more conservative. So it seems like, just another nail in the coffin of the West.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, some people were questioning how these statistics were found, and it was based on which parties you indicate a preference for, and that doesn't work because the Conservatives aren't conservative, and blah blah. So I've heard things like this. But yeah, on that point, I mean, well, I'd say people should listen to my upcoming Current Thing episode with John Sonmez, who was one of the OGs of the red pill online, and he was saying, look, women are a mirror; they'll follow you, they'll reflect what you do. So that's where I got my propaganda from. I just think men need to just up to men to be the change, be ultra conservative. But it is tough, isn't it? When you are sort of on the conservative side, it's not considered cool, and you are sort of like a weird outlier, and you get called all sorts of things. And I don't know. You can maybe not. You can either not explain it to women, or you have to be, or you have to explain it, and like as we're saying, just convince them over time, or you sort of have to just date within your weird. But then conservative women are weird, obviously. So
Why do you think it is? I mean, we could speculate about why men seem to be becoming more right wing, but why are women becoming more left wing? Is it
that's
because
easy.
is it because the way in which kind of radical progressivism presents is as more feminized than populism or conservatism? They purport to care about the vulnerable. They're more inclusive. They prioritize safety over liberty. They don't put people before profits. It's all got this kind of feminine dimension designed to appeal to women who value those things on average more highly than men. They're more, it's as though the kind of ideology of radical progressivism has taken on this feminine aspect, and it therefore is more likely to appeal to women than to men.
Yeah, that's it. It's compassion. It's the sort of straightforward, ostensible, on the face of it, compassion of things like socialism that they get sucked in by. Whereas men, this is shown in the US and things, it's white men basically who are voting for libertarian ideas and the Second Amendment and things like this. These are more abstract, rational ideas like, oh, we might need our weapons in case the government turns usurpacious and tyrannical. This is much more of a rational idea that's counterintuitive. Whereas women are like, oh yeah, everything should be fair and equal, and that's just how they are naturally, just how they're wired. Men aren't too bothered about equality. We're more like, now we're going to go off to the woods and going off to the woods on my own and do my thing, and you can come with me or not. We're just very different. And the other thing is agreeableness. Women are famously high in agreeableness, which means they care more about social convention. So when the world goes left, they go with it. Whereas men are more likely to go, "No, I'm not sure I agree with that. I'm just an autistic guy in a basement or wherever I am, in a lighthouse somewhere going, no, I don't, I've checked the stats
Yeah,
and that doesn't
yeah.
stack up."
And a less charitable way of putting that is that women, on average, are more conformist than men,
That's it.
and therefore they're more susceptible to mainstream media and social media propaganda. So if they
That's what I
watch
just said.
CNN and they're on X, and the general tenor of their information diet is progressive, then they're more likely to align with that progressivism because they're more conformist.
Yeah, and of course there are good reasons for that, and that's a kind of social intelligence, and it's a social intelligence that comes from survival. Presumably, a woman looks around and goes, "Okay, what's the vibe here? How do we survive in this scenario?" They're more vulnerable, obviously. And they go, "Okay, this is what we're doing," and they're smart enough socially to work it out. Whereas men are kind of stupid. Where sort of we might even see what's going on. We go, "Nah, I don't want to be part of that," and look at Laurence Fox. We deliberately make things hard for ourselves because of certain principles and points of principle. It's just how we are. There's no female Laurence Fox. Okay, you do get these outliers who are like that, very rare. Katie Hopkins. Okay, you do get them. They're very rare. It's far more male to sort of go, and she sort of talks like herself as kind of being a bit like a man mentally. It's far more masculine to sort of go, "Nah, sod that, I'm doing this," and be pilloried for it. Whereas women are like, "Oh, they'll notice your shoes. They'll notice everything. They understand fashion." It's a completely different set of perceptions. And it's not better or worse, Toby. They're very smart in that way, but men just, yeah,
Do,
we
do
don't
you
care.
think? Do you think you date a liberal woman?
It's a great question. I actually met up with my ex-girlfriend the other day, and I was thinking it's very hard to find someone this beautiful who has some equally abhorrent views to me. It's very, very, very hard to find someone like that. And I was thinking, and she's got the same problem. She keeps trying to find these guys, and they'll be good looking or successful. Then they've taken the vaccine, or they're a woke actor and they're just a complete idiot. So it's tough for her as well. It's very tough. And when you do have these views, it is very hard. My answer to that, Toby, is yes, but I would have to then embark on this project of gradually showing them the light and the way. I always get on really well with Amy at GB News. Someone like Amy, she's the most woke person, but she's a really nice person. And I've met her kid, and he's a great kid. Testament to her as a mother. Her views are absolutely awful. I always say to Amy, "You're so nice, but your views are just absolutely insane." And she says, "I think the same about you." So it can be done. Not that we're dating, but she's married. But hey, but that type of thing, there could be a woman like that, and you convert them gradually to the truth and the light. I think it could happen.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that my wife is a liberal. She's not woke. She's not a radical progressive, but she's certainly liberal. And we've managed to navigate that particular difference fairly successfully.
But you're a
Sometimes it
liberal.
makes for some interesting arguments. No.
You're a liberal. I mean, she's a feminist though, as well.
I'm a classical liberal,
Okay.
which puts us in slightly different places politically.
But doesn't it end with you just
But
losing the argument and going to the shed?
quite often, yeah. By the way, your mention of vaccines reminds me of something, which is my son, 18-year-old son, is about to go to Brazil. He's in his gap year, and he's managed to save some money from working in a pub, and he's heading off to Brazil, and from there he's going to go on this sort of tour of South America. And he went off yesterday to get some shots which he needs, before he can go to Brazil. And he said, "Dad, I got some bad news. Apparently you can't get into Brazil unless you've been vaccinated. So I had the COVID vaccine," and he showed me this kind of plaster on the kind of vaccine area in his arm, and he had me for a second. I was like, "Oh, you absolute idiot! You didn't! Oh my God, you're going to get myocard!" And then he said, "I'm just kidding, Dad. I'm just kidding," and he sort of cracked up.
That's awesome. Yeah, you can't be. How can you possibly on the dating apps? I'm not on them, but I've seen them in the past, and all the women started putting vaccinated. They put pronouns and they put vaccinated just to prove our point about social conformity. They put vaccinated. It's like, why do I want to see them vaccinated? And some of them even put things like no Jordan Peterson fans, because they're one reason for that, I've probably said before, is women are trying to disqualify, whereas men are trying to qualify. So women get so many messages they need to on these apps. It's ridiculously stacked in that way. So they need to disqualify. So must not be a Jordan Peterson fan born in June, whereas men are just trying to qualify. So it's going like star sign. We're going yes. You know what I mean? Where it's got to be like the most blob, like nothing person just to get through the series of hoops. Whereas they're like, must not like Jordan Peterson or cheese. And it's just like, and they put all that rubbish. And whereas, of course, my ex-girlfriend, the one I referred to, didn't have the vaccine. And I did know another girl, very nice, and she was so against it that she was a Christian. She had to get it to travel for a job she just couldn't get out of or something. But she held up her cross when getting it because she knew it was, it was inherently evil, which I found hilarious.
What's happened to the blue-haired hottie in your apartment?
Greenhead, yeah, I saw her again. I
Greenhead.
wasn't that bothered, and that was that. But yeah, there's been many. Well, there's not been many. There's been nothing since then. But there's just been. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know about that. So I give up. I just work all the time. That's all I do. Work. I thought of some other stories to tell you actually, but I think they're off air only.
I'll put them in the premium section.
Put them in the premium section. Yeah, it'll just be more about my ex-girlfriend and a lot of more details. But so sign up, guys. I think that is the end of our main stories. So that's the end of our sort of normal domestic stories there. All right, well, now let's do our occasional section. It's Across the Pond. And we're going to have all kinds of graphics in future for these, and it's going to go across the pond, and there'll be a whole sting. I don't know. It's not going to do that at all. And I just cough. But go on, Toby. You look like you want to say something.
No, I think we do have in the video version, which you can see over on our YouTube channel. That's the free version, or you can see the premium video version if you subscribed. If you subscribe at basedmedia.org, we do have those fancy graphics, Nick. Now.
Yes, but they're going to get even more fancy, is my point, and I'll be singing on them. So the first one I think we should do is the impending civil war in America. It didn't kick off quite as much as I thought. Yeah, it started with Texas. It sounded like Texas was going to secede, so it was all this debate over the border and the barbed wire, and Texas wanting to defend its border, but Biden not allowing them to, or saying it's going to cut the barbed wire in this whole standoff. And it became called Standoff at Eagle Pass, which I love. It's like an old Western movie, isn't it? It's just such a great title. It's definitely like a 70s movie or earlier. Standoff at Eagle Pass. You imagine one of those, that's earlier than the 70s. That's one of those old-fashioned trailers from early Hollywood.
Yeah.
You'll be so entertained by Standoff at Eagle Pass. John Wayne, as you've never seen him. Hey, Pilgrim, and you know what I mean? Who's the other guy from It's a Wonderful Life? Jimmy Stewart.
Jimmy Stewart, yeah.
Hey, buddy. And it'll just be, I don't know, they've all got the same accent. But
with Anthony Quinn as the leader of the Mexican bandits, El Paso.
Yeah. And a white man as an American Indian with some makeup on. Standoff at Eagle Pass in theaters now. Yeah, so Standoff at Eagle. I mean, I did say if you were going to start a civil war in America, or you were going to even write a fictitious thing about it, you would start it in Texas in a place called Eagle Pass. It was just so perfect. I'm a little light on the details though because it was a week ago and I haven't really checked out what's going on. But basically, Greg Abbott stood up. He said, no, we're defending our border. We're Texas. We do what we want. Then like 25 other states supported him, and it looked for a while like it could kick off in the new civil war.
Yes, I mean it has been quite dramatic. It's a standoff between the National Guard and the Texas Rangers about the defense of the U.S. border in the state of Texas by Eagle Park. And I guess if there is this national, I thought when I read the story, if there is this kind of beautiful national park on on one side of the Rio Grande, it might be quite difficult to stick a wall up, mightn't it? I mean, was Trump proposing to kind of stick a wall up on the American side of the Rio Grande in Eagle Park? Was that one of his ideas?
Big,
anyway,
wall we'll put it in the middle of the park. People are gonna love the park will be ruined. Yeah.
It seems to be becoming a increasingly big issue in the forthcoming US presidential election. Even Biden now, I don't know if you saw, but like yesterday, he said that my hands are tied by Congress. If I was allowed to do something to strengthen our borders, I would, but my hands are tied. It's like, I don't think many people are going to buy that.
No, I did see something saying that Biden effectively backed down, but let's see. Here's Tim Pool posting just 21 minutes ago as we record about civil war. He's the happiest man in America because he's been predicting civil war every episode for about 5 years or more. So, let's see. I mean, let's see how it goes. I don't have loads more on that. We're just going to keep an eye on it. It was breaking sort of last week as we recorded, but other people have way more information than me. We just wanted to quickly touch on it just to show that we were aware that America's about to have a civil war. Because it would look bad if we weren't aware. Who would win is the big question, isn't it? Because you've got the Texas people with all the guns and all the training, but you've got the establishment has the drones and all that. But it's not clear. The argument is always, we just drone you into oblivion and we just bomb you. It's not that simple because you've got all the people on the ground with weapons. They can fight in the cities. They can fight guerrilla style. And if you just drop a massive bomb on American citizens, it's quite a big PR loss. So you can't really do that until very deep into the war, at least. So it's not totally clear
Yeah.
who would win.
And as we've been talking about earlier, there'd be a risk, I imagine, that a lot of the U.S. Army personnel, or even people, members of the National Guard, who are expected to go to war with American patriots, might not have anything like the same kind of enthusiasm, the same determination as their opponents. I mean, that was to a certain extent one of the characteristics of the
Vietnam
19th century U.S. Civil War. You can imagine it would be a bit like the kind of establishment side, the unionist side in Civil War 2.0 would be a bit like the kind of Afghan army, which just kind of scattered when attacked by the Taliban. But who knows?
I thought we were going to compare it to Vietnam because the Vietnamese knew their territory, they had their tactics, and they wanted it more, and that's why they won that. But no, it's a good point. Yeah, you could compare it to the previous Civil War. Let's just hope the good guys win this time. You know what I mean? Hey guys, in the American Civil War, the good guys win this time.
That's a shocking thing to say.
It's a little pro-slavery banter there.
You're going to get us cancelled.
This doesn't get us
on YouTube now.
Nick,
this is on YouTube. You've got to be careful.
Funny stuff. Oh well, that's one pond story. Let's do this other one concerning a certain Donald J. Trump, and that is Trump comes out fighting. So Donald's lawyers reveal how they plan to challenge. So I'm really tired. 83.3 million jury verdict in Eugene Carroll case as they discover startling link between the writer and the judge. So he got done for 83 million. This absurd case of the woman who claims to have been assaulted in the early 90s in a department store, bizarrely. And but it turned out that Judge Lewis Kaplan and Carroll's lawyer, Roberta Kaplan, who are not related, weirdly, worked together in the early 90s, and the judge served as her mentor. So this was the legal team and the judge being sort of, having a clear conflict of interest. One thing that was really interesting about this to me, I won this whole thing really, because they defend themselves and say, in a statement to the Post, representative for Roberta Kaplan, Zach Sawyer, denied there was any conflict of interest and said the two barely knew each other. They overlapped for less than 2 years in the early 90s at a large law firm. And I thought, okay, so knowing people in the early 90s doesn't really mean anything. It's too vague. It's a long time ago. And yet, the whole case is an allegation that Trump raped this woman in a department store in the early 90s. So I'm like, can we rely on the early 90s and people knowing each other and crossing paths or not? Because that's what the whole case rests on. I thought it was an interesting. I think I just unraveled the whole case there. But Raheem Kassem was also posting about it, saying that this woman apparently, well, his claim was that the case that she claimed against Trump was awfully similar to the plot of her favorite TV show that she binge watched. He also claimed that the dress claimed she was wearing hadn't even been designed at the time, and other various kind of red flags. I don't know. Have you followed this case, Toby?
Yeah, a little bit. And it's extraordinary, isn't it? The amounts that are awarded in these trials compared to, the amounts awarded in ours. I mean, I think that it looks as though Laurence Fox, if his appeal doesn't succeed, will have to pay $2 million. And that's mainly in, legal expenses rather than damages. Whereas Trump's now on the hook for 83.3 million, and in the Alex Jones case, it was like in the billions, wasn't it?
It was the GDP of France in Alex Jones's case, roughly. But yeah, it's absurd. They're trying to take these people out, Trump and Alex Jones. It's very, very clear. We all know this.
Yeah, I mean, I think that. How plausible is it that Trump would have raped someone in a department store, in a department store changing room. It just seems,
I know.
scarcely credible, doesn't it?
He did that whole stand-up routine about it. Yeah, Raheem Kassem says she alleged a rape in a public place 30 years ago, but provided no evidence. Her story was remarkably similar to a plotline of a show she binge-watched. The dress she claimed to be wearing hadn't been in design at that point. She's obsessed and continues to talk about how sexy rape is. That's a strange point. I'm not sure he's got to prove that one. Her case was thought up by George Conway and Molly Jong's Fast House Party and was funded by Democrat Jeff Epstein buddy Reid Hoffman. Anyway, it goes on and on. Probably all sorts of. He can probably get sued for all the things he said there, but I don't know. The case seemed incredibly weak to me. 83 million, absolutely absurd. But we all know it's boring to go on about. It's part of the persecution of Trump, and anyone who thinks anything else has extreme Trump derangement syndrome, even more extreme than your Trump derangement syndrome, Toby, which some of our people have commented on. We'll get into that in the paid section when we review the reviews. But all right, that's pretty much that. I've already mentioned the Alabama execution and Ben Shapiro rap. We're going to talk about maybe in the paid section, and then there was another thing that Taylor Swift was thought to be a Democrat psyop, but you probably haven't looked into it too much. But there's some red flags, like she's with this guy who's like winning everything in the NFL, and she's sort of mic'd up at the game kind of weirdly. And there was this piece, I can't remember, it was in the New York Times or Washington Post, and it was about the sort of Taylor Swift strategy that the Democrats have. They're going to invoke some strategy, and it's said to be like trying to get Biden onto her tour. So she's become a kind of asset for the Dems. Have you heard any of this?
No, I haven't been following that, but it sounds unlikely, doesn't it? Would she jeopardize her enormous following by picking a side?
Oh, she's picked a side. That happened a while ago. She picked a side. She picked them a while ago.
What? Has she said that? Has she urged people to vote for Biden?
She said loads of sort of
the forthcoming election.
No, I'm not sure, but she said loads of lefty.
I know she said lots of woke stuff in the past. She's quite progressive, right? Yeah.
Inside Biden's anti-Trump battle plan and where Taylor Swift fits in. This is in the New York Times, but I haven't read the whole piece, so just wanted to flag it in case anyone was an enthusiast for this. But yeah, I think it's, without knowing much about it, I say it's definitely true. You've got these big assets, these famous influencers. Of course, they're going to use them to try and influence the vote. We already know they were using TikTok people. The Biden White House were employing TikTokers. So I think it's incredibly feasible that they're going to utilize Taylor Swift in some way. I'd say it's almost impossible that they wouldn't. That's my view. What do you think? No?
I don't have a strong view. My children are more across this than I am, and it's odd, isn't it? That I think that my children slightly resent the Swifties suddenly developing an interest in American football, because they're all quite interested in American football and they see these new arrivals as Johnny-come-latelys who, where were you before Taylor Swift started dating this quarterback? I think there's a kind of resentment that suddenly American football's becoming glamorous, and it's got this huge Instagram presence now, amongst kind of within their kind of extended peer group, which it didn't have before because of Taylor Swift. I think they sort of slightly resent that.
Yeah, well, she's got great songs, but terrible views. So that's Taylor Swift. All right, well, let's go and do everyone's favorite section then, which is Peak Woke. So, Toby, we've honestly done way too long already. We shouldn't be giving this long to the free people. I mean, they don't deserve 2 hours of free. We've completely messed this up. I mean, we're getting way far too much free content. Who's going to want the paid stuff after so much free stuff? It's ridiculous. I say give them 10 minutes free. But I thought I'd do a few peak wokes here. Boy 4 allowed to join Church of England school as a girl. Did you see this one? This was weird.
Yeah.
They were told this boy was a girl, but they all knew it wasn't because they're children and they know the truth. And it turned out this kid had been flashing its willy or his willy at the girls, and he's believed to have told them in the toilets about dark spirits that will suck their souls out, and said it's a deep secret that she is actually a boy, but they mustn't tell anybody. And this has traumatized some of the children who've said that they know the truth and they've sort of not been eating and all kinds of things like this. So it's actually had a traumatic effect. One of them said her daughter had been behaving strangely last term, including refusing to talk or listen to the radio on the way home, hiding under the table and suffering from stress-induced insomnia and constipation. And she said after repeatedly asking her child if something was wrong, her child told her this month that she knew the secret that her classmate was really a boy, and she was distraught she'd been holding hands with her. I mean, how horrific.
Yeah, no, really shocking. Um, uh, did you see that the BBC are handing out £50,000 to woke comedy writers um, uh, to try and support underrepresented groups? So under these new guidelines, they've created these grants of up to £5,000 to reach targeted comedy outreach and inclusion activity, and they're for small organizations, groups, or projects engaged in comedy focused outreach activity, prioritizing underrepresented groups across the UK, as if BBC comedy isn't woke enough. And I thought, as a prank, maybe you and I could compose, a sitcom script and apply for one of these £5,000 grants. You could be Nicola Dixon, and I could be Toby Young, pronouns they, them, and we could see how we get on. And then, once we got the 5,000, we could then throw a massive party and reveal that it was all a huge prank.
Good idea, kind of Bogosian-esque idea. I'd be behind that. And BBC, while we're talking about them, there's another story. BBC staff told not to hire candidates who are dismissive of diversity. BBC staff are being told not to hire candidates who are dismissive of diversity and inclusion, which means excluding people, of course. Absolutely insane that they haven't picked up on this yet. Like I've said, institutions are way behind, and companies and on DEI, which is about to DIE, but they just haven't realized it yet.
Yeah. It's extraordinary. Every time you think the BBC is finally responding to criticism and accusations of liberal bias, it then does something like this. One of my favourite peak wokes this week is Hillary Clinton's quote about Barbie's Oscar snub. I don't know if you followed this, but the Oscar snub supposedly consisted of the fact that uh, um, uh, neither the lead actress, she wasn't nominated for Best Actress, and Greta Gerwig wasn't nominated for Best Director. And this was thought to be a snub, whereas Ryan Gosling was nominated for Best Supporting Actor. And Hillary tweeted, I think she put it on all her socials, but on Twitter and on Instagram, Greta and Margot, while it can sting to win the box office but not take home the gold, your millions of fans love you. You're both so much more than Kenneth. Get it? And she signed off #Hillary Barbie. And I mean, this was cringe-inducing, but one of the odd things about it is, it can sting to win the box office but not take home the gold. It sounds like she thinks that she was the real winner of the 2016 presidential election, and it was stolen from her.
The election is still living rent-free in her head, and very much Trump. Yeah, she won the popular vote. This claims by nearly 2.9 million, though that is ABC News. But yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of what the vibe she's going for with that.
That is what she means. Yeah. Okay.
But still cringe-inducing. And look, Ryan was just better. Men are better at acting. What can we do? There it is.
And one of the embarrassing things about this tweet is that, in fact, Margot Robbie has been nominated as a producer, because it's been nominated for Best Picture, and she's one of the producers. And Greta Gerwig has been nominated for Best Adapted Screenplay. So they have, in fact, been nominated for Oscars, something that Hillary seems to have overlooked.
They have to have everything.
Did you see Ryan Gosling's? Did you see Ryan Gosling's quite cuck-like remark? He said, "No recognition would be possible for anyone on the film without their talent, grit, and genius. To say that I'm disappointed that they are not nominated in their respective categories would be an understatement." It's like, I bet he's actually kind of singing and dancing about the fact that he got a nomination and Margot Robbie didn't.
I used to like him. Incredible actor. Always seems cool. That's upset me. Do you have any more, Toby? I've got maybe two more. I'm getting very tired, though.
What else have I got?
I'll give you two. While you're looking, I'll give you two more. One is sort of squeezed into Pete Woke. Actually, I'll give you three more. One's from memory. One is that SNL did a piece on Trump talking about debanking. So Trump kept saying debank, and he kept saying he's learnt this word now, and he loves it. He kept saying debank. Now, we all know the word from Farage and others. But SNL did a sketch where they go, "Oh, Trump's got this new made-up word, debank. What's he talking about?" It's just such regime woke comedy. They're siding with banking, and their position is, "Oh, Trump's stupid because he's made up the word debank." No, you're just unaware of what's happening in banking. You absolute morons. That was that.
That was that. Do you want to do your two others, or shall I throw in some?
I'll do this one quickly. Labour MP Kate Osamore has whip suspended over Holocaust memorial post referring to Gaza. Did you see this? So she goes and posts.
Oh yeah, I did.
Tomorrow is Holocaust Memorial Day, an international day to remember the 6 million Jews murdered during the Holocaust. Okay, yeah. The millions of other people murdered on Nazi persecution of other groups. Okay, and more recent genocides. Careful, in Cambodia. All right, Rwanda, Bosnia. All right, cool. And now Gaza. So she had to throw in on Holocaust Memorial Day an obvious pointed reference to Gaza being a Holocaust. Absolutely disgusting stuff, but classic Labour. I mean, look, you can say what you want, and we can all see what you like. Pro free speech, which is such a Labour thing to do. It's like, and by the way, Gaza's actually a Holocaust. It's like, oh, piss off. Disgusting.
Yeah, no, that was dreadful. I think she has had the whip suspended, hasn't she, as a consequence? So there's a new exhibition claiming that the first Britons were black. It's an exhibition on diverse history. The Royal Navy is actually redeploying some officers to its diversity and inclusion team, in spite of the fact that the Royal Navy is now so undermanned, it can't actually deploy aircraft carriers to the Red Sea. It still thinks it has sufficient capacity to redeploy some of its officers to its diversity and inclusion team. Admiral Nelson has been included in the now infamous National Maritime Museum's Queer History Night. And of course, there was the EU's new language guidelines, which I saw you tweeted about, in which it wants us to degender our language. So you can no longer say manpower. What do you say? What do you have to say instead of manpower? People power?
You have to check. One of the big changes was you had to say queen
Labour.
and king instead of king and queen.
I saw that, yeah.
And there was
that's not neutral. That's just straightforwardly opposite, isn't it?
You had to say average citizen instead of Joe Public. And my argument was it's an attack on our entire culture and the poetic vernacular that has naturally emerged from it. Yes, I said it was like taking away rap from Black Americans because Joe Public, these are poetic phrases that have naturally emerged from our language. Of course, it's an assault on men. They're admitting that, but it's also an assault on our entire culture because our language is an inherent part of our culture. The only thing about this, manpower, you have to change to workforce, human power, labor force, workers. I mean, a no man's land, poetic, evocative of the war, they probably don't want to remember. Unclaimed territory, they want that to change to. I mean, it's just pathetic. But that apparently was from 2019 was the only strange thing because it got spiked on headliners and because actually it was guidance from 2019 that weirdly the papers had all suddenly run with again. So I don't know why it popped up again.
Yeah, it's weird.
But it was certainly peak woke. All right.
My final one, Nick, is Shakespeare's Globe, which is a sort of monument to wokery, has issued a trigger warning in advance of its new production of Antony and Cleopatra. And the trigger warning is a misogynoir trigger warning. So it's a portmanteau of misogyny and noir, the French word for black. And it means specifically misogyny directed at black people. And apparently, according to the Globe, some of the attitudes towards Cleopatra in the play reflect misogynoir attitudes. And of course, they've cast a black woman to play Cleopatra, overlooking the fact that actually she was probably a white woman. Anyway, it's I'd never heard that before. It's a new one on me. Misogynoir.
I've heard it.
The play contains.
Yeah, I've heard it quite a lot, and I've been aware of it for a few years. And then I heard it in person when I was buying some shoes, and the very nice kid in the shop mentioned that word, and I thought this guy would hate me so much if he knew who I was. So I like him, and I want to buy the shoes, but if he said, what do you do? Oh, I spread the opposite politics to you on the telly and in the podcast. So it's a weird thing. I always worry in public about if I just announce anything about what I do. there was the GB News producer that gone.
But how did it come up in conversation with a shoe salesman?
I just was asking him about his life and what he was into. We had a nice chat. I'm a friendly guy, Toby. People like me. And I get into these chats, and I was talking about The Devil Wears Prada. I was like, oh, he'll like that movie because he's a fashion guy. So I find things to relate on. And for some reason, he brought up, oh, well, I'm just into he brought up misogyny. And he just asked him about his life, really. And I just thought, oh, he'd hate me so much. And there was a producer who's left now at GB. This might be why he left. He was getting a haircut. Oh, who'd you work for? GB News. They didn't finish their haircut and left him with a half-done haircut. It was always in my mind. I just think, oh, I can't tell these people what I do. But from now on, I will be telling women on dates what I do and just holding frame and conversing them.
Misogynoir sounds like, an aftershave, doesn't it? Sort of aftershave I might give you for Christmas.
Misogynoir
by Calvin Klein.
Yeah. And then you have to pretend you like it and not admit who you really are. The only other one I thought we should throw in is the eco-morons who attacked the Mona Lisa by throwing soup at it. I mean, what can you say, really? Eco-clowns, they've been called, eco-morons. Riposte alimentaire, which apparently means food response in English. When you put it in English, it sounds like a Meals on Wheels service. It doesn't quite work as well, does it? Food response. What's your response to great works of art? Food. And we throw it at it because we're fucking morons. I mean, come on. Just like Philistinism at its height. And of course, one of them's called Sasha. They're always the posh cultists. Did you follow that? I mean, follow.
I did. I saw that. Yeah, I saw that. I saw the video of the what was it? Was it looked like tinned Campbell's soup being thrown?
That would be interesting because that would be a Warhol reference. But I don't know. Maybe it was.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. I don't know.
Meta art references.
That was it. Yeah.
All right. Well, that is peak woke pretty much. And Toby, we've given far too much to these free people. 2 hours. I don't like this. For the free people, they should be getting about 10, 15 minutes tops because we're not even doing advertising. So anyway, but now we're going to go over to our absolute legend paid supporters at basedmedia.org, BASED media.org for the extra stuff, which soon will consume almost all the podcasts. But for now, it's like an extra half hour on top of this. Go to basedmedia.org. There's loads of different subscription options. Anything else you want to add, Toby, that I've forgotten?
No, I think we're going to end this free version, aren't we, in a sec? But if you want to hear the remainder of this podcast, including review of reviews, as well as reviews of reviews.
Review the reviews. That's all. The paid content is just Toby trying to speak, by the way. Actually, last week we got some really interesting paid content about why Toby's such a workaholic and how his drinking ties in with it. It was really actually insightful. But anyway, go on, Toby.
Yeah, so if you want to hear the remainder of this podcast, including review the reviews and Nick and me talking about the new #1 single by Ben Shapiro, Rapping, you'll have to go over to basedmedia.org and become a premium subscriber. And it only costs, you can do it for as little as £5 a month.
Yes, because the grift is on and we want to eat food, guys. We're trying to eat pieces of bread and not starve and have some water. Can you believe it? And a roof over our heads. Disgusting grifting. And quickly, while we're talking about grifting, just a reminder, Weekly Sceptic Live, February 12th at the Hippodrome. Tickets available now. It'll be a great show, as always. dailyskeptic.org to donate to Toby's World. Free Speech Union .something and .org as well. Buymeacoffee.com/Nick Dixon to donate to Nick's World. If you hate Toby, if you hate one of us, there's still options. Buymeacoffee.com/Nick Dixon. NickDixon.substack.com, where I'm posting way more, including my brilliant army conscription piece and several others. And I think that is pretty much it for the free content. So until next week, stay skeptical.
Stay skeptical.